¿Y si el éxito no fuera crecer más, sino saber cuándo parar? A Jan Paul le ofrecieron más de 1 millón de libras por su empresa y decidió decir que no. Y ojo, esta no es una historia para idealizar ni comparar realidades. Sabemos que no es lo mismo nacer en Latinoamérica que en Estados Unidos, que en Europa o en alguna otra parte del mundo, pero esta conversación no hablamos de cifras, sino de prioridades. Hablamos de qué pasa cuando el trabajo deja de darte libertad, de cómo escuchar el cuerpo y de elegir con más conciencia qué vale más en tu propia vida. Seguir acumulando o empezar a habitarla mejor. Y quédate hasta el final porque nos comparte una reflexión que tal vez pueda ayudarte a mirar distinto tu propio camino.
Are you ready for the interview?
I am ready. Hopefully you will find it interesting.
Let's go.
Cuéntanos un poco de ti.
Well, I'm quite mixed. So I was born in America. My father is German. My mother is Finnish. I've lived in England for most of my life, from when I was an early teenager. But I've spent quite a lot of time in France and in Canada. I've done lots of snowboard seasons. So that has meant that I've got to spend time in the mountains rather than in the forests here and the countryside. That's my background.
¿Cuál es una de tus grandes pasiones y cómo nació?
Gosh, one thing. I'm not sure I could actually put this down to one thing. I tend to I tend to get hooked on things quite often, but I love my snowboarding. I love my kite surfing. I love cooking, especially doing barbecue outdoors. So I really enjoy doing cooking over an open fire or using a smoker to slow cook meats. I was also into my windsurfing when I was younger. I've been involved in photography. I do lots of drone photography. So it's kind of difficult to pin this down to one thing that I'm passionate about. I love snow. I mean, that's one thing that has driven me through my life from when I was 4 or 5 years old. So I grew up when I was, initially I was born in America, and then I spent 2 years in Finland when I was, I think, about 4 or 5 years old. So that's a very formative time of your life. And I was lucky enough to be in Finland, where we have amazing snow in the winter. The oceans freeze. You can go walking, skiing for miles out into the ocean. And that always brings me to a happy place whenever I see snow. I love watching snow fallings, and I love being out in the snow, whether it's making a snowman or just walking in a forest through snow. And obviously snowboarding, that's a really important part of my life. It's I'm not sure whether it's the snow that I love there that's driven me to do the sport, but I also enjoy the actual sport of snowboarding.
¿Hubo algún momento o experiencia que cambió tu forma de ver el mundo?
There's been quite a few different moments. If I look at my younger times, discovering music was very, very key. I remember when I first moved from America to England, the music scene is very different here in the UK. And I would, I started listening to pirate radio station when I was 11 years old. And I used to hide underneath my duvet with a tape recorder, on the old style boom boxes that had a radio and you could press record on tapes. And I would record pirate radio stations through the night, and I would make my own little mixtapes. And that was really my introduction into music. I then ended up doing DJing off the back of that. So I was doing, by the time I was about 15 years old, I was doing mixing using multiple tape decks at pool parties for friends. And that changed life for me quite a lot, because I was able to focus on music, and that's a useful thing as a teenager to have that focus point. I was in a band as well. I was in a heavy metal band playing guitar, but I didn't find that as rewarding as just being able to take other people's music and remix it. I'll probably say one of the things that was a transition was when I was into photography. I was photographing people windsurfing, and I was watching the windsurfing thinking that's something I'd really like to do myself. So I transitioned. That was a change moment for me that really influenced my life, because I went from being a photographer to being a sports person. And I then carried through my windsurfing for quite a long time before I moved across to kite surfing. Much bigger jumps on kiteboards, so that was quite exciting. So there's been lots of different moments where the outside world has changed the way I've seen it, and I've then wanted to participate in that world.
¿Qué fue lo que te llevó a dejar tu trabajo de oficina y cambiar por completo tu estilo de vida?
The leap for me was in different stages. So I had 2 or 3 jobs after university, and I was working for people who I was concerned perhaps were not seeing the world in the same way as I do in terms of technology. So this is before the time of the internet. People didn't have emails. People didn't have iPhones. They didn't have, there were no websites at that point in time. And I first started in the advertising industry, and it was for a fairly substantial advertising agency, and I wanted to help them to develop interactive adverts. This would have been probably about 95. So we're almost talking 40 years ago, something like that. Quite a long time ago. 30 years ago, something like that. Anyway, so I then ended up working for quite a few interesting companies that were doing better things with technology. Worked in molecular visualization, worked writing psychometric test programs for the RAF. RAF being it's the English flying planes. And I got to a stage where I was working as a marketing director for a company in London. This was before the dot-com boom, so it would have been 97, 98, something of that time. And I was approached by several people to see if I could help educate them in terms of what direction the internet was going and where the technology could be applied in their businesses. And at that point in time, I ended up realizing I probably had a good business. So I set up eCreation, which was my own company, in 98. We grew to 15 employees by 2001. We had offices in about 2003 that accommodated 25 people. And there is the responsibility of having lots of employees is really changed the dynamic, where you don't get a chance to work so closely with clients. You're spending an awful lot of time looking at spreadsheets. You're trying to find new employees. That I didn't enjoy. So that was the point where I realized, do we really need to have an office? Do I really need to have this many employees? Is there a way that I can give myself the freedom that I've been looking for from a very early stage of thinking about setting up my own company? So I closed the office down and reduced headcount by 90% in the space of 1 year. And I effectively went snowboarding around the world for 5 years. So that was a major change. And that was driven by the fact that I realized that time is quite time is the most valuable asset you're going to have in life. And it's the pursuit of money. Yep, we could have grown the business and we could have made a lot more money. But for me, I was probably 30 something at that point. And I was aware of the fact that my body wasn't in as good shape as it was when I was in my teens and early 20s. So I thought, okay, now it's time just go snowboarding, max out that time and enjoyment while I can. And I've not gone back since. So I've never set up another office. Everything has been done remotely since that point in time. Everything runs pretty smoothly. As long as you're working with good people that you trust, you don't need to be face to face. You don't need to be in the same environment. And I think that's really, it's about having trust in the people that you work with to be able to deliver.
Cuando empezaste a trabajar en línea, ¿cómo reaccionaron tus personas cercanas?
That's an interesting question. I would say family were slightly less supportive than I would have hoped, only because my family are quite traditional. They come from a corporate background. My father mainly, so he worked at very large corporations his whole life. And I think that was part of my driving force, is I didn't want to work for large corporations, seeing my dad work for those organizations. My friends, they were highly supportive, having that network there to help you in terms of getting your name out there and your brand out there. That was, I would say my friends were extremely supportive, although the pressures of setting up your own business meant that I didn't actually have the chance to socialize with my friends as much as I wanted. That was one of the reasons that I actually took time out from running the company at the same pace I was running at, because I realized I just wasn't spending time with my friends. I was spending all my time thinking about business, and my friends were secondary. And that's now changed. Now I'm able to focus on my friends, and the business is secondary, it's important. I think that's very important.
¿Cuál fue el mayor reto al pasar de un trabajo tradicional a una vida más flexible?
There's probably lots of moments where I thought, what have I done? But it was never really any regret in that decision. It was quite considered. It wasn't a decision that was forced upon me. So I did quite careful planning in terms of how I wanted to get between the different stages of having that flexibility and freedom in my life. And I would say that I'd probably been planning for that from the age of 20. So I knew very, very early on that my hobbies and passions were going to be a driving force in my life, and that work should be secondary. I probably got pulled into work more than I thought I was going to in life. I'm lucky in the fact that I have lots of hobbies and passions that are sufficient to drive me. And quite often I've converted those hobbies and passions into businesses as well, because I've set up so many different businesses. With the snowboarding, I set up my own snowboarding school in Finland. We worked on revolutionizing the way that snowboarding is taught, using video-based training together with physical feedback devices. My passion for barbecuing. I've been asked to write several books about cooking, and in particular the social element of cooking. So one of the books was about how to teach. At the time, I was single, and I had a website which was aimed at helping single guys to understand cooking techniques and to integrate it into dating. So when they went on a date with a woman, or if they were cooking for a lady at their house, they would be able to say, okay, this is an interesting scientific process that's going here, how I'm frying this bacon. It sounds random, but it was very interesting to people, apparently. The website did very well. We were getting hundreds of thousands of visitors. Oxford University Press asked whether I'd write a book about this. I didn't actually get the time to write the book, unfortunately. But I think that's the thing. If you're really passionate about something, you can create a business or you can monetize that, particularly in today's environment where you look at all the people who are like Instagrammers and people who have YouTube channels like yourself. You're doing it because you're passionate about it, and the money comes as an offshoot. Whereas other people, they tend to focus on a business because it's going to make money. I don't think that's ever going to be as much fun as when you're doing something you enjoy in everyday life, and then you find a way to be able to monetize that.
¿Cómo lograste equilibrar el trabajo en línea con tus pasatiempos, especialmente tu amor por la gastronomía?
Doing snowboard seasons was an interesting one because I was able to work remotely. So obviously having a good internet connection was pretty essential. But I would have started doing this on my first season would have been almost 20 years ago. So internet connections out in the Alps and in Whistler and the Rockies and so forth were not particularly great at that point in time. And I would wake up quite early. I would be at work by 7 o'clock in the morning on my computer. So not actually physically at any desk or anything like that. And I would work on a principle. I'd get 2 hours work done. So I'd then be able to go snowboarding until 4 o'clock. And then I'd be able to come back from snowboarding and I would be able to put another 2 hours work in. Time differences makes life a little bit more complicated when you're out in Canada versus United Kingdom. But we did have international clients, so sometimes they would be on Asian time or European time. So there would be an offshoot where I could sometimes work at different hours to suit the client as such. So I think the internet was essential in being able to facilitate me being able to go and do the snowboarding seasons, and particularly when I was further away from the UK. There's definitely a big difference between being able to fly back to London in the space of 1.5 hours versus somewhere in Canada where you're talking 12, 15 hours journey time. And I would go back on a regular basis from the Alps. So I had my own chalet out there that I was living in. And I'd actually bought a car. So I would book tickets for every 2 weeks to go back for 3 days to the UK. And then I'd go back to snowboarding. Couldn't do that when I was in Whistler, Canada.
En este nuevo camino, ¿qué experiencia relacionada con la cocina recuerdas con más orgullo o emoción?
Sure. Barbecue has been my obsession for about 2 years now. It's amazing how you can end up focusing on one piece of meat, which is the brisket. Unfortunately, I went down the rabbit hole on the internet and learned about Aaron Franklin and lots of other traditional Texas-style barbecuing people. We don't really have the weather here in the UK for it to be ideal for doing barbecuing. But it's interesting how something like barbecue, it allows you to develop other skills. So I had to learn how to weld. I never knew how to weld before, but because we don't have the smokers that are being produced in the UK, we're not as good as the ones that are being made in America. So I had to get my welding kit, had to get a welding mask and learn how to weld metal. I ended up learning crazy amounts about wood and how to season wood and what's good wood, what's bad wood, because if you go and introduce one bad log into a 12-hour smoking session, it can ruin a piece of meat. It's crazy. But there's small details like that even though what you're seeing is a final product you think is just a piece of meat, but there's so many other elements that go into it. The science behind understanding how a piece of meat, when it's in the smoker, it's going to go through a particular heat pattern where it goes into reverse when it goes into the stall. Again, I didn't know anything about that. I didn't know that meat can sweat and it's actually going to drop down in temperature in spite of the fact you're applying more heat to it from the outside. Same as a human being. When we're out in a hot climate, we sweat and that cools our body down. Outside is still hot, but we end up being cooler. Similar principle. So there's even scientific elements that come into that. So I would say that my proudest moment was when I produced my first brisket, which someone who had been out to Aaron Franklin's in America, and he'd done some time traveling around trying American barbecue. He said, "Yep, this is just as good as what Aaron Franklin does." And I was like, "Okay, he's my hero. He is God to me. And if I can produce something that's at least comparable to what he does, then I'm a happy man."
¿Qué habilidades o hábitos fueron clave para que este cambio funcionara?
I think discipline and focus is probably the most important skills, because being able to focus on a particular task in an environment where everything is changing around you is incredibly important. If you're likely to become distracted by things that happen to the point where you're not able to deliver on what you promised you're going to deliver, then it becomes quite difficult to be able to survive longer term in that type of environment. I would say that there's been times where I would stay up for 36 hours to solve a problem. My phone going there. I'll ignore that for now. And that dedication and focus allows you to. It's essential. I would say it is really important to be able to deliver products for clients.
En lo económico, ¿lo planeaste con tiempo o fuiste resolviendo sobre la marcha?
I would say that I'm a financial planner, so I do try to think quite far ahead, and I've certainly made mistakes financially. I've made some decisions that were not the smartest decisions, but I've always been working on the principle that passive income is a key way to be able to have time independence. So I started investing in property quite early on. I was investing in the stock market from quite a young age. So these are all devices that allow you to have a baseline of income, which gives you that freedom, which if you're working in a job, you don't necessarily anticipate, because you have the regularity of an income coming in from a job. But because I've been running companies myself from a young age, you tend to condition yourself to be aware of the fact that there's going to be fluctuations in the fortunes of any company you have. Sometimes one company might be doing well, other times it won't. You might have a fantastic year where you get a huge pile of money, but if you don't anticipate the years where there's not going to be the money coming in, then it's very easy to become off balance. Whereas if you know that you've got a baseline of income that sits at the bottom, then everything that's sitting on top is just it's a bonus, really. And that's how I've tried to structure my financial approach.
I am curious about something. I know that you meet people also around the world. Do you see some difference about the financial habits, about maybe culture different things?
Yes. So my brother, he lives in Japan, and Japan has a very strong culture of saving. I don't think that the United Kingdom and USA have a strong culture of saving money in terms of actually having a cash pot, an emergency fund. There tends to be a focus on investing, but as a means for creating more money. So it's that sense of the pursuit of more always, which sometimes is slightly unhealthy, I would say. So I think that there's certain cultures around the world that have a healthier relationship with money in terms of understanding that there's no point in having 100 million in the bank when you expire, when you're 80 years old, because you probably could have had a better life going through spending that and doing things and having nice meals and seeing places you wouldn't have otherwise seen. And I think that it's just not to be political or anything like that, but in the UK, for example, there's a very strong culture of using your home as an investment. Now that is something I think is quite specific to United Kingdom, and it's something that has been culturally encouraged by governments across decades. And I, having lived in Finland, property tends to go down in value across time, whereas in the UK, property goes up in value, and people approach property in a different way. Same thing in Japan as well, because of earthquakes and other cultural elements. The older a property is, the less valuable it is. England doesn't work that way. So people will focus on putting their money into, they'll put like as much money as possible into property because they're taught that is a prudent financial approach.
¿Qué consejo le darías a alguien que sueña con dejar un empleo tradicional pero aún no se anima?
I can't really say, depending on who that person is, but certainly if you have confidence in the skills that you have and that you are able to do whatever it is that you want to do, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you've actually been trained in a particular area. So whether you're a lawyer, whether you're a doctor, whether you work in government, whether you're a designer, there's always, if you know that you're capable of learning and continually learning, then there's nothing to stop you from leaving whatever it is you're doing, because you can always learn the skills that will allow you to do whatever you want to in the future. Now, there are certain people who perhaps are not so driven in terms of the fact that they don't necessarily feel that they want to put that effort into to push those skills. But I would just say do it. If you want to do something, if you feel that you can make a difference in the world doing something else, then that's as good a reason as any to go out and do that.
Con todo lo vivido, ¿valió la pena? ¿Qué planes o sueños vienen después?
Certainly the decision to run my own company was the best decision ever, because that's what actually gave me the freedom to then say, I don't want to have my own company. I just want to go traveling around the world doing snowboarding and kite surfing and cooking and reading books and all these kind of things, which I would have been restricted if I'd stayed doing what I was doing at the time. And this, again, is I think an important element of this is that it was, that decision was not made on a financial basis. It was made because I felt I could actually make a difference. I was quite lucky, in theory, in the fact that I was offered a multi-million pound payout for my business 2.5 years into the business. So I would have been a multi-millionaire before the age of 30. And I said no to that. And some people would argue, at that time, that probably would be worth close to 30 million now. But and people would say, okay, do you have any regrets about not having taken that that amount of money. But no, I don't, because doing the business allowed us to change so many elements of industries, change different industries. We got the chance to build the first flight booking system on the internet in Europe. We got the chance to build software for Amazon that helped make Amazon work the way that it worked. We did the first pharmaceutical website in the United Kingdom for allowing people to order prescription drugs online. If I'd stepped away from that business at that point in time, I wouldn't have had a chance to do that. And I'm sure I would have more regrets about the things that I hadn't have done rather than things that I could do with just having money. So staying focused on what the goal was of the business, which was to build cool things, do cool stuff. That's more important than money, I would say. And next steps now, what's the next big thing? I'm not sure. I'm trying to work it out. I've been doing my tennis, but my knee is now not doing so well. I'm off snowboarding in a couple of weeks. We've got good snow out in the Alps, so I'm very excited to go out for that. No, I don't really have any specific next big goals. I'm taking things a little bit slower right now, and taking time to appreciate the more basic things in life. Being able to sleep more.
Para cerrar, un último mensaje que quieras compartir y dónde podemos ver tus proyectos.
I would go back to the whole thing of saying, just do it. If you're passionate about something, just take the leap. And particularly if you don't have responsibilities of family, that can make life a lot easier, because you may have family at a later stage, which makes life a lot more difficult to be able to take those riskier decisions, as some people would see it. And yeah, if you want to find out any more about my travels or my cooking exploits, or see me snowboarding or kite surfing or whatever, I've got a few different places you can find out. On Instagram, you can find me under Smoking Barbecue Bad Boy. I'm sure there's probably some text down there right now or something that's kind of showing that. There's also some drone videos that I create on a regular basis that you can find on YouTube if you search for Jan Erik Paul, spelled as one word. Again, I'm sure it's somewhere down there right now on the video. And if people want any business advice, you can find me on LinkedIn. And I'm always happy to connect with people on LinkedIn and discuss any business ideas they want. I'm always intrigued by new ideas and things that are going to change industries or change the way that we live our life. And people always have such amazing ideas, but sometimes it can be quite useful to have another person to kind of bounce and to ration check ideas, and that's something that I feel I do quite well. eCreation, that is my company that I set up in 97, whatever it was. So you can also find the website eCreation, so it's e-creation.co.uk. Find out some information about the company there. That's pretty much me.
Si esta historia te movió, cuéntanos en los comentarios qué te dejó y ayúdanos a compartirla para que siga viajando. Suscríbete a Ecos en Ruta y activa la campanita para no perderte ninguno de nuestros episodios. Hasta la próxima.